Nancy was 32, fiercely independent, and had spent years building a career that left little room for distractions. She had become a rising star in the marketing world, known for her precision, intelligence, and ability to see patterns others missed. She lived alone in a spacious house just outside a quiet town, surrounded by fields and distant forests, a place that reflected her desire for control and solitude. Her parents lived 2 hours away in the city, and her younger brother, David, resided on the street just nearby, a familiar presence, though one she hadn't fully understood in years. Nancy had always dreamed of love, marriage, and a family of her own, yet every partner she had ever trusted vanished at some point, leaving her questioning fate and the strange patterns of her life. Still, she never gave up on the idea that one day she would meet the right man, the one she was meant to love. It started on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. Returning from work, Nancy stopped at the supermarket for groceries. As she reached for a carton of juice on a top shelf, it slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. When she turned to pick it up, a man was standing there, holding another carton of the same brand. He smiled at her, calm, measured, with a certain intensity in his gaze that unnerved her just slightly. Henry, he introduced himself, casually mentioning that he had moved to town only a few days earlier. Something about him drew Nancy in, a magnetic pull she couldn't explain. That evening, he invited her over for tea. Against her usual caution, she accepted. Henry's apartment was orderly, almost meticulous, lined with bookshelves and filled with the faint scent of coffee and polished wood. They talked for hours, sharing details of their lives, work, and small personal quirks. Through the large window, Nancy noticed a shadowed figure in the neighboring building watching them. She assumed it was a neighbor, lingering near the window, and dismissed the sight, though a subtle unease lingered. Over the following 7 months, Nancy and Henry grew close, their relationship steady and comforting, a slow rhythm of familiarity that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't before. They laughed, cooked together, took walks, and eventually decided to marry, convinced at last that Nancy had found her soulmate. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Henry disappeared. No calls, no messages, no sign of him anywhere. Nancy's panic rose immediately, familiar and suffocating, the same panic she had felt when past partners vanished. She visited his apartment repeatedly, called neighbors, checked his usual routes, but everything led to silence. 7 days passed before a knock came finally at her door. Henry appeared, bandaged, scratched, bruised, and shaken. He told a story of a car accident, of being unconscious for a week in a distant hospital, unable to contact anyone. Nancy found the explanation strange. Hospitals always contacted relatives, but the conviction in his voice persuaded her, and she let herself believe him. 2 months passed. Henry recovered, and they resumed planning the wedding. One afternoon, while Henry was at work, Nancy decided to visit her brother to deliver a wedding invitation. She knocked on his door, receiving no answer. The house looks abandoned. Dust coated the windowsills, weeds tangled in the garden, a house neglected for weeks, perhaps months. Using a spare key she kept hidden near a garden statue, Nancy entered. The air inside was thick, sour, filled with the smell of rot and neglect. In the kitchen, the refrigerator contained moldy, decaying food. The rooms were cluttered, dusty, and grim. Nancy's chest tightened as she realized her brother had been gone, or at least hadn't cared for this place for a long time. A knock at the front door startled her. A man handed her a letter asking for David and mentioning an unpaid debt of $50,000 to a plastic surgeon who had operated on him 4 months prior. Nancy accepted the letter, reading it carefully. Alarmed, she immediately called Henry, intending to tell him what she had discovered. But as she dialed, she heard the ringing of a phone coming from the basement. Hesitant, yet compelled, Nancy followed the sound. On the workbench lay a shattered phone, the fragments unmistakably Henry's. She froze. When Henry had returned from the hospital, he had said he bought a new phone because the old one was destroyed. Now the pieces before her told a different story. Her gaze landed on a large chest freezer in the corner. Trembling, Nancy approached it and opened the lid. Inside, a small Ziploc bag rested atop frost. She unzipped it and drew out a piece of frozen skin tattooed in the exact pattern Henry had. A crushing realization struck her. Every inconsistency, every absence, every unexplainable moment in the past months converged into one horrifying truth. The man she had loved, the man she had planned to marry, the man she trusted implicitly, was her brother, David.